Hi, Moss here with Campfire Audio's Atlas. Yes, that's the god that had to hold up the heavens, or the cosmos. So, this is, came back from Tokyo's Fujiavik Headphone Festival, and that's it's twice a year. It's a fantastic event. It's one that's inspired Ken Jams. I met Ken there and we talked about it. And I will say, so this is an anticipatory thing, I did have the best IEM experience I did have there was with the Atlas. Now there's a caveat to that in that I did listen to some high-end IEMs, but there was at least one pair where after I talked to someone afterwards who said, no, you have to use certain tips on them, otherwise they sound awful, and they had been demoed with regular tips. But these were fantastic. So I was now you may remember the good old Vegas, which I have here with a Dita cable on them. These were really, I was really happy with these. They're very bass strong headphone, very bass strong IEMs, and these are the successor. An interesting thing that Ken said, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying, is that, you know, after being very successful with a pair of IEMs, how do you do better than what you did before when you've already been very successful? And that's why the Andromedas, there's no Mark II of the Andromedas. How do you beat a successful pair of IEMs like the Andromedas? Anyhow, I haven't seen how the setup is with these. We've got a nice dark case. This is black. I don't know how my camera shows it up because of color balance, but this is black. Very black. I have my camera set to show maximum color depth of field, so that will, because blacks otherwise just get blackened out. So here they are. Well, they come in, well, that's funky. They come in nice little bags. And why? Now, I've also got a second cable here for them, which is the 4.4mm one. I won't be using that specifically, but someone else, the person I'm passing them on to, will. Now, here is why, the bags. And here is why I have a nice desk cover. Check this out. Now, you've probably already seen the photos, and probably better than the video is going to show. But these are, after they're made, they're buffed until they're buffed to a mirror finish. And they've got the standard they have the usual connector. And I will still have the reference 8 cable, so I'll try them with and without the reference 8 cable. Oh, these just are fantastic. I'll take the tip off. Still have the same end, so your spin fits will still fit on there. It'd be interesting to see if they do work with spin fits without changing the frequency response much. Now, I still have the good old Hi-Fi Man RE2000s here. So these are pretty looking as well. And the question will be, these are, apart from frequency response where they're a bit bright in some situations, these are still, I think, the best dynamic IEMs, pure dynamic IEMs I've ever heard. And now I haven't heard everything, obviously, but these I think may be just the ones to beat them. These need burn-in too, according to Ken. So I shall be, playing music through them for, a couple of days before I start listening. In the box, for those who are wondering, information guide. And we have, wait, this is not Campfire Audio, it's Final. It's ear tips from Final. Now that's really interesting. Your foam tips, unbranded. Rubber tips, which are kind of very open and look like they're kind of like the most open Dita ones. And a pin, how cool. And the warranty card. So, I've got to try these tips as well. Now this is getting interesting. So, now what's the Edge Style series? Let's have a quick look. I've never seen this all-time best fit. Now, spin fits were supposed to do this. Spin fits are usually the ones most comfortable for me. I don't like foam tips, but I wear them when I have to. I'm reading off the screen here. All-time best in terms of fit has been achieved through the selection of optimum shape in the vertical groove axis X silicon rigidity. Optimum aspect ratio for each size. I see. Well, I will try this, and I shall report back. Well, this is interesting. A frequency response graph, C and D. The pressure of the bass tones changes according to how airtight the fit between the earpiece and the auditory canals. Well, we know this. You lose bass if you lose fit on a dynamic, usually. Interesting. Well, I'm going to try both of these and see how I go. Now, of course, my ears will be different, but I'll give it a shot, and we'll see what we can do. Anyway, let's get on to listening. One of the first things to note about the Atlas is that it comes with a pure silver cable. Now, for comparison, here is the old Litzwire cable that comes with the Andromedas and the Vegas. And you notice two things about it. Of course, the braiding is different, being the first one. And the second one is that the earpiece attachers have memory wire. Now, the new cable does not have memory wire, and this is pretty apparent why this is. If we look at the Vegas, you can see they've got a left and a right earpiece. You can see the angle of the cable comes out at a 90 degrees, almost 90 degrees compared to where the ear tip is. So that means you have to have two different pieces, and then it has to go around your ear really. There's no other way to wear them. Now with the Atlas, it uses obviously a single piece and two of these single pieces, and it can be worn with the cable pointing down in this direction if they're coming out your ear, or you can do it around the other way and have them up and around your ear for preference. So either way will work, and because you have if you do have memory wire cable, of course you've got this connector which can swivel, and so you're fine whatever you want to do with whatever cable. But it eliminates that issue of, you know, some people just like to have their IEMs and the cable pointing down and not around the ears, especially if you wear glasses and don't want to entangle them. Now they are a little bit heavy in terms of IEMs, but not enough that I found it was at all difficult to have them stay in my ears. Now I don't expect to be doing air guitar music, and for that, if you're going to be jumping around a lot, I would wear them over ear in that case anyhow. But they feel substantial, but, you know, again, not too heavy that they're going to fall out easily, especially with these final tips that are included. Now, speaking of tips, that has a lot to do with the sound, and the sound, of course, is an improvement on the Vegas. So you have better treble extension, better mids, and better bass extension. Now, with that, they do sound a bit brighter than the Vegas, and someone I wrote on Headfire recently, they found the Vegas too bright. Now, I have spiral dots on my Vegas, which extend the treble even more, so I guess it comes down a lot to the kind of music you listen to. Now, I'm going to get started with this, that if you do listen to modern compressed music, where everything's been run through software that makes everything sound equally loud, you're not going to get the real benefits out of something like the Atlas, and I would recommend sticking to cheaper IEMs with a bit of a warmer sound signature. With good, well-recorded music, especially two-channel stuff, which has a lot of dynamic range, these are absolutely fantastic sounding. Open, spacious, but with a good amount of bass. And to a degree with the tips, you can tune that. Starting with the good old foamies. With the good foam tips, it does rein in the treble, especially on dynamic driver IEMs. It does rein it in somewhat. And it does rein in the bass as well. So this is the most neutral option, given that these are not really neutral IEMs and they have somewhat of a V-shaped sound signature. On the other end, on the brighter end of the scale, you have these spiral dot tips. Now, if you haven't already seen these, I'll see if I can get the camera to focus. You can just see inside there, these little spirals of dots just inside the tube there. What these do is they improve the sound quality by reducing distortion inside the tube created by the tip. But being that they're kind of open bore, they will bring out the treble more on a pair of dynamic driver IEMs. So they're really nice with acoustic music, especially if you like things a bit brighter and really, you know, a bit less in the bass. The other end of the scale, of course, are these tips from Final. That's called the Type E. They have a narrower bore and they bring out the bass much better. Now they've got a kind of fairly rigid center. It's got ridges on there, and they just as you saw in the unboxing half of the video, they really do extend the bass, and they can sometimes make things a little bit overwhelming if there's already too much bass in there. But the bass quality, like the rest of the ALO IEMs, is excellent, so that even though it can be strong, it doesn't overwhelm the mids so much. Though I will say that the mids are not as forward as, say, something like the Andromedas. So if you want a more even sound, you're going to have to stick with the Andromedas, I reckon. However, where you do mostly listen to acoustic music, these are fantastically open and spacious, and they sound like these, the Hi-Fi-Man RE2000s. Actually, it's funny that the tuning is so similar between them. The RE2000s I like a lot, and sometimes they can be too much of a good thing because the brightness in them can make some old music, especially with a lot of distortion. And I'm just thinking of something I listened to recently, which was Jefferson Airplane. That really over-enhances it, and that can be less pleasant. But with a lot of acoustic music, I really do like these, even though sometimes I think they're a bit too V-shaped. Well, funnily enough, these seem to have almost identical sound signature. However, I reckon the Atlas may have just beat them in one area, and that is flexibility. Now, if I start rotating tips around on the RE2000s, for whatever reason, it just seems to ruin the sound. Whereas if I rotate tips around on the Atlas, it tunes it slightly, but doesn't end up ruining it at all for me. So the RE2000s I felt were the best pair of IEMs I had here. They are, you know, the $2,000, you know, I think they're a very worthy $2,000 pair of IEMs. Some may not agree, but all the same, I really enjoy listening with them, especially with a lot of the music that I like. Modern music, not so much, maybe older music and good recordings. Now, the Atlas may be the one to beat them because at substantially less money, they give the same sound quality. And to me, I was at the recent Tokyo show where I first heard these, and I thought, and you know, Ken and I were talking, and he posted this on Headfire. We've both gone around listening to various IEMs, and with maybe one exception, I didn't really hear anything that was anything like that sounded anywhere near as good in the treble as these do. And a real test, of course, is cymbals. A really good quality recording where, you know, there's percussion and cymbals. And the cymbals in these sound realistic, and they don't have the issue that a lot of IEMs have, where you get what I call IEM treble, or balanced armature treble, where the treble sounds unrealistic. So for me, these are now my favorite pair of IEMs for choice. And if I was going out to buy a pair of high-end IEMs, I'd probably go out and buy a pair of these. They're substantially well made, the beautiful metal, and one of the interesting things is now they're all metal. So if you see here compared to the Vegas, if I pull the tips off, you will see that now the Vegas, where they had plastic at the top, now it's just all metal. So the quality on that has improved as well. It looks like much nicer. So much nicer if you look super close up. If I get out the macro lens and take a close-up photo, this is going to be way more attractive, obviously. Now, I listened to a wide variety of music and through a wide variety of equipment with the Atlas, and consistently their performance was excellent. Now, that performance is something I have to note is if you listen to modern compressed music where they've run everything through a compressor to make everything sound equally loud, you're not going to get such good results. And a lot of that music that out there is over compressed and ends up sounding kind of distorted. So as well as sounding congested and distorted, these are kind of overkill for that kind of music. However, if you do like high quality 2-channel recordings, these are really fantastic. Although with the kind of more extended treble that they have, you will really notice flaws in the music as a result. Now, the frequency response they have is not dissimilar to the good old Vegas. Now, the Vegas has somewhat of a V-shaped response with quite strong bass. However, the Atlas extends that out a bit more and increases the overall quality of, you know, the bass, mids, and treble. So you still have somewhat of a V shape, but the bass in good 2-channel recordings doesn't intrude too much on the mids. But it can, if there's already a lot of bass in the recording, can be a little bit overwhelming. However, with a lot of music, especially music, just like the Cascades, which I reviewed, if the music is kind of a bit lacking in mastered with a bit of a lack of bass, such as some of older pop, as long as it's well recorded, of course, and some older jazz, it can sound really fantastic and it can be really excellent with things like classical recordings. Actually, the IEMs they're most similar to in frequency response seem to be good old Hi-Fi-Man RE2000s. They have very similar V-shaped response and a very similar performance. However, there was quite a difference, and that's with the tips. Now, with the RE2000s, I felt like that if I tried to put any other tips on them for the most part, except maybe spin fits or anything with a wider bore, especially, that they kind of ruined the sound of these. And I don't know why it is, particularly with the drivers of these, that the sound would change so radically, because it wasn't that way with the Atlas. Now, the Atlas, of course, comes with a variety of tips. You have your good old foam tips. The foam tips give the most kind of even sound overall. I already have a pack here open here, which I was using. Now, they tame the treble very slightly and rein in the bass a little bit, so that's the kind of, you get the most even sounding result of all the tips that are out there. The other ones which you can see on the Vegas are spiral dot tips. They're very similar to the tips that are included with the Atlas, which are these, much like similar to the Ditas, these kind of more open topped tips. You can see that, I don't know if you can see through the packet there, the bore there is kind of more open, much like the spiral dots. Now the spiral dots, if you aren't already aware, are from JVC, and they have these literally a spiral of dots inside the tube, and this reduces resonances, and generally they get a result of improved treble. And being more open at the top, you tend to get a more treble focused result. It's not so dramatic with the Atlas though. Now, of course, the other tips that are provided, which we already saw in the unboxing, are these Type E tips from Final Audio. These of course have a narrower bore, and the result is a slightly reduced sense of treble, but extends out the lower bass, and this can work out really, really well, and I've been using these mostly. But the overall change between the tips isn't as dramatic as, say, especially with the RE2000s being a comparison. There is some degree of change, but it's not quite so dramatically large. So I don't have any other tips around here to try, but that gives you a general idea. It's very similar to how like the original Dita audio IEMs came with a variety of tips with different bore sizes, and you could just subtly tune the treble, much as you can, of course, with the Campfire Cascades. I also tried the Atlas with a wide variety of equipment. To start on the lower end, I tried it with the Hi-Fi Man's good old $99 Mega Mini. Now, it's not the most resolving DAP. It's actually fairly and a bit warm sounding, and it could still power them, so they will still power nicely out of a phone. There's no trouble with that. But they really do scale up to better equipment. As usual, I've got the good old Continental V5 from ALO, I've got the Chords Mojo. These do a really fantastic job with the Atlas, and especially given that their treble is a bit brighter, you know, the slightly warmer sound from equipment like this was actually quite nice. Now I also have Chords Hugo 2, which can't fit in the screen obviously, and you can notice the jump up to the Hugo 2 with these, so it showed that they scaled up in terms of detail retrieval quite well, although maybe not quite as much as my Focal Utopias. There's also another entry which you saw just earlier, which is the Blue Wave Get. This was actually a nice pairing, surprisingly. It's a surprisingly resolving little Bluetooth unit, and it was even compared to the good old AK380, which I'll just squeeze in here. Using just the AK380 directly and versus this, there wasn't like a huge jump up. So it's definitely worth considering. If you already have or are considering getting good equipment to use with something like the Atlas, you will really benefit. So it's another case of good music, good equipment, and good IEMs, and you'll get really fantastic sound output, and you can tune it just a little bit to your tastes. Now, speaking of tastes, if you do find the idea of something that's a bit V-shaped in sound to be too much, probably you still might want to consider going for the Andromedas, which are so it's still somewhat more even sounding. But all the same, the Atlas delivers a really, really very clear sound, but with very tastefully managed bass delivery, which can make a lot of music sound fantastic where normally it might not. So at the recent Tokyo Fuji Avic Headphone Festival, I was having a discussion with Ken. It always came around to, you know, have you heard anything good recently? And Ken is very old school and respects what other manufacturers have created. And really, there was very little I found in the IEM scene that has the kind of clear treble that these do. I think the RE2000s were actually the last, and actually have been my favorite dynamic driver IEMs for quite some time. But for the most part, the Atlas have clipped that because the flexibility with the tips that you can use and the way you can tune them well, which seem to not quite work so well with the RE2000s, makes them very special IEMs for me. So if I was going to choose a pair of IEMs now, I'd probably choose the Atlas as my IEMs to go for. And they also come with, they're beautifully designed, beautifully made, and come with a very nice cable to start with. So you don't have to go out and, none of that, oh, you've bought these now, you have to go out and buy all these accessories. If you do have some good gear to work with, these are really fantastic to listen with. So thanks once again for watching my video, and do give it a thumbs up if you did like it, and do subscribe if you'd like to be notified about more. Also do check out my website. You can go to that by here.reviews, and if you'd like to help support me, if you can spare $1 or more per month, all my reviews are supported by patrons. So do check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Currawong. Also, if that's not your thing, do consider buying your headphones and IEMs through the links on the sidebar on my site, as by doing so it gives me a couple of bucks and helps me make these videos, which do cost money to make. Also, I did hope this review was useful for you. If you do have any questions, comments, or even criticisms, please do post them below the video. Also, thanks very much to the people who do support me. It has been extremely helpful in making these videos, and I'll see you online.